Greetings and welcome to Epicor Eclipse General Customer Maintenance. This presentation is somewhat long and tedious, so we're going to go through this pretty quick, or as quick as possible anyway. A customer record is created and or maintained in one of two ways. The most common way is when a salesman is in sales order entry and they go and create a new record. This is a limited subset, a little convenience template for just creating the bare bone entries for a new customer as a COD, no line of credit. The other way is through the solar menu, through maintenance, and this is usually done by the credit manager position. This tool gives you the full set of features for the customer maintenance record to fill in the additional information, add bill to, ship to's, lines of credit, and printing options. There are several variations of a customer record, and we will try and get through all of them in this presentation. This slide here just shows you the main screen of a common customer record. For most systems, there's going to be templates set up for a variety of different common customer settings, which you'll just copy and rename. Or the credit manager in many cases is going to be taking a basic record that was started by the salesman, using that base template and adding to it and making parameter changes. But we're going to do it from scratch here. Starting with the names, names can only be 35 characters long. Avoid putting commas or quotes in the name. And common formats to use, try to use just the doing business as name. If this is a general account, a common line of credit which might be used on several jobs, usually you put the name and general at the end of it. Add some type of job abbreviation. If this is a job account that's going to be tied to a customer, like Fred Ferd First Street job or something like that. If this is a no line of credit, a cash on demand account, then put in brackets COD at the end of it. So here we're creating new customer record from scratch with the name of Xander Zerd. Common layout for customer records is usually have one bill to, which is just the name of the customer and address, and this is just where the bills are going to be sent to. There's no line of credit established, nothing's going to be charged against that. Then typically there's another record which will be Xander Zerd General, and that will be a small general line of credit which they can apply to a variety of small things, typically under $5,000. And then you would have Xander Zerd and different jobs that might have large lines of credit and lien rights attached to it. And all of those would point to this main record so that all the billing would go to an office address. As soon as you get to the city entry of the record, a little pop-out's going to come out here to select the zip code. It doesn't allow you to freeform enter the zip code. So select the proper zip code for this particular city on the list as an additional verification. If the zip code that you need does not show up, then the person who handles the zip code maintenance for the system, usually the credit manager or accounts payable, possibly the financial officer, will have to go in and create the zip code for you so you can go ahead and complete the record correctly. The next field you're going to mess with is going to be the sort by. Sort by is only 12 characters long max. It's usually just the first 12 characters of the name. You can adjust this a little bit and it'll change the sorting order of the jobs when you do a quick search for the customer. The index is used for additional search criteria to look up the record, and in most cases it's just the same as the name. If you've got funny names, keep in mind the search engine in Eclipse expects a minimum of at least 3 characters to key on to do a search, and there can't be spaces in between the characters. So funny companies like A period, B period, C period electric or something like, or US electric, you're going to have problems searching with. So in the index you might want to make additions, as you see here in the notes, to make the record more searchable and to get past that funny little 3-character search limit that Eclipse has. In the contact phone area, you should at least put in the phone number for the accounts payable contact, because that's going to be the most relevant for the credit manager when bills need to be paid. And an AP fax if that's still relevant, if you're dealing with someone that still has a fax machine. If neither of these exist, then you'll put in the phone number for the owner of the company, so at least you can get him on his cell phone. You should create contact entries for every contact that you can think of in the company. This usually isn't necessary for the credit manager, but it comes in very, very handy for the salespeople, and if there's some issues that need to be done. Eclipse has a pretty decent contact manager and some simple CRM functions that come in very handy. Unfortunately, no one seems to use the darn things, which is unfortunate when you have the salesman has got all the phone numbers and contact and emails for the people that he contacts for a particular company stuck in his Outlook, and he goes on vacation for a week. Then everyone else in the company is screwed because they don't know how to get a hold of whoever and get things sorted out. So I definitely strongly suggest that everyone put in all the contacts that you can for the company and try and maintain them. Contacts can be created and seen and or maintained in 2 different places, either in customer maintenance on the contacts tab as you saw, or in the contact selection off the main menu in Solar, of course in eTerm as well. Changing it in one place will change it in the other places and makes it accessible in the other places. Aside from just the basic, knowing who works for who's related to what, and having a nice common place for everyone in Eclipse to be able to get in and look at this stuff when they need it, this is also very useful for sales and marketing, who regularly want to reach out to customers and see if they can shake the trees for some more sales. If you don't record that stuff, they can't do their job. Back in customer maintenance, the www address tab, this is a holdover from the eTerm days before they had the contact section integrated. And typically the only thing that's put in here is the email address for AP. So when invoices and statements are emailed out of the system, this address is the one that normally defaults to unless otherwise specified. Select the username for the account manager from the drop-down list and select that. This is used in reporting. It's really only useful if you have multiple account managers and you need to know who's assigned to who and who did what. Customer type, bill to, ship to. Bill to is where the bills go. Ship to is job or where materials go. In some cases, a customer may have the bill to where the bills go, but they don't have a shop floor to receive materials. Anyway, the normal settings that you see with this is if you just have one general account, even though it may not be marked general, typically bill to and ship to are both marked because there may be materials delivered to the customer and that's where the bills go. There may also be a line of credit. If there's just where the billing is going to but there's no line of credit and you're not delivering materials to that location, then you'd have just bill to selected. If you have a job, then typically you have ship to selected, and then the bill to record is specified in the field that you see here, and that way you know the materials are delivered to the job site. The statements and invoices are sent to the office. COD accounts should also be ship to checked, bill to unchecked, and pointing to the other record. So in all cases, a customer should only have one bill to address where all the bills are going to, and may have multiple ship tos. So to review the general layout, set up a normal bill to account just for contact and billing information. Set up a general account tied to the bill to for general purpose or pre-job setup orders on the established credit line. This is usually a small credit line that can be used for a variety of purposes. set up a COD account tied to the bill to capture common counter will call orders. Oftentimes when the owner sends his helper out to go grab something from the counter using credit card or cash. Set up a job account, which is just a ship to tied to the bill to, with its own credit controls and usually a filed preliminary notice. So this has its own line of credit established to it, but yet the bills for the job are being sent to the bill to address, the office. So here's a common bill to account example. Since this is a bill to, you'll notice it has no entry in the bill to field because it is the bill to. You'll usually see in the credit controls no order entry because this address is used for billing purposes. You don't want to do an order against this record. And typically the contact and AP/AR reporting information is set up. Here's an example of a general account. As you can see here, it's set as a ship to. It's tied to the bill to entry. It has a credit limit, a small line of credit established. It has the normal no order entry parameters when the credit's exceeded, and the terms codes, of course. Here's a common COD account example. Here we see bill to is unchecked, the bill to entry is selected, the COD flag is set to always, there's no credit limit, and we have the terms code set to COD. Here's a job account example. Once again, bill to is unchecked, ship to is checked, bill to account is selected. Here we have a credit limit that's been established. The parameters for no order entry when credit exceeded have been set, and we have the job information, at least the basis of it, entered in here. And ideally, in most cases, a preliminary notice would have been written and already filed. When you search for the customer's accounts, at least the ones we're used here for examples, this is how they will appear in the search, unless of course you monkey around with the sort by field as we discussed earlier. The main account, the main bill to, will always show up as you see there on the top. It'll mention the number of ship tos attached to it, and that's your visual indicator that that's where the billing is going to. Back order status handles how the sales order is processed when some of the items that are on it have been put on back order. They weren't in stock. As you can see, you have a variety of options, but typically ship when complete or secondarily call when complete are the most common. Outside and inside salesperson. These are by default who's assigned to the account to calculate the commissions if your company does commissions. The salesperson default can be overridden and changed in the sales order in the header when needed, but these are normally the defaults. When you see house, that usually means this is not assigned to a particular salesman, so it's non-commission, it's a house account. And the only other setting that you'd normally see is occasionally when closing jobs, I usually put an inside salesperson as closed, but of course you have to create an account in the system marked closed, so you can do that. Freight in, freight out exempt controls whether or not you can pass along freight charges to this particular customer. There are a variety of different places that control freight charges, but this is the first set that you come across and the most common. Now that we've covered the main credit maintenance screen, let us go to credit controls. For the cash on delivery section, we have two parameters. We have always, which may be checked for cash only / credit card accounts, or we would have when credit limit exceeded checked for a credit account. This is a standard setting when the line of credit is exhausted. The sales order can still be completed if they go ahead and pay via cash or credit card at that time. No printing of shipping ticket. When credit limit exceeded unless authorized, this is the standard setting for a credit customer. This is, of course, if you exhaust the line of credit and you still have an order in process. You don't want to ship it out if there's a possibility we're not going to get paid. The other flag option, regardless of credit limit unless authorized, this would be normally used by the credit manager if they need to force the customer to come see them because they're having problems with some collections before they'll go ahead and release an order that's in process. No order entry. Always is selected when a job is closed, so that obviously you're not continuing to do orders on a job that's already had the credit limit exhausted, everything's been paid, and it's closed, and the lien rights have been released. And when credit limit exceeded is the standard setting for a credit account. This prevents a salesman from accidentally creating a new order when the line of credit's been exceeded. The credit limit is normally established by the credit manager, and this is usually done by Experian credit check and trade references. If you're setting up a general account, very rarely is a general account have a line of credit beyond 10,000, and even 10,000 is a bit high. 1,200 to 5 grand is the usual range for a regular customer. This is because you want the general account as a stopgap. Anything past a certain level, you're going to want to set up a job and establish lien rights and do a preliminary notice to ensure that you get paid on the job. The general is usually just little slush funds for little niggling stuff that's too small to worry about a job account, or it's used as a stopgap to allow them to order some parts to get a job started while the paperwork's in process to get the lien rights in the job set. The past due limits can be used to tweak the behavior of the credit controls, but honestly it's seldomly ever used. Terms codes are used to set payment terms. Net 30 is the standard, which reads as the total bill is due within 30 days or credit charges will be allocated. 210 net 30 is probably the second most common, which reads a 2% discount if paid in the first 10 days or the total due in net 30 days. Terms can be altered. These are the defaults, but they can be altered in the sales order in the header if necessary, provided the salesman doing the order has the proper authorizations in the systems. If you're going to set the terms and there's a certain term that you want to use that doesn't exist, you'll have to go into terms codes maintenance and set a new one yourself. There's probably no limit to the variety of terms you can come up with, but I would dare say simplicity is the key. Don't get too crazy with all the different variety of terms that you can come up with. Allow credit exceptions. These are used to program special exceptions for an account, but simplicity is key, so they're not normally used. Certainly you can do very creative things with them, but the maintenance overhead tends to make them not worth the effort in the long run. Temporary credit limit. This is used by the credit manager to set a temporary credit increase to expire at a certain date for special circumstances, perhaps allowing the customer to catch up on their billing payments. This is a pretty neat feature, but honestly I've never seen it used. In the additional info tab we have a variety of parameters. Honestly, I've never seen any of them used. The only thing that I see regularly used is selecting the name of the credit manager. If you have one or several, select the appropriate one. Electronic funds transfer. This probably requires an additional companion product from Eclipse, or it may just be used as information that the bank has already set up automatically and you just want to record it here. I have never seen this used. If this is a job, fill out the job information. This can be useful for reporting purposes, and the contact information here is pulled from the contacts listed on the main customer maintenance screen. The customer order entry instructions allows you to write little notes that will show up in the sales order entry screen or in the ship and pick ticket paperwork as necessary. The shipping instructions would be useful for the warehouse people when pulling the order, or the driver that's delivering. Internal notes might just be a little something to remind the insides or counter salesman when they're completing the order. They have to look in the header section in order to be able to see the notes. And here's an example of the notes being displayed. In the sales order, both notes show up in the header. In the paperwork, only the shipping instructions will print. The internal notes do not. Order entry messages are messages that will pop up in the sales order as soon as the sales order is started, and this is information to remind the salesman to do something when they're creating the order. Typically the credit manager uses this little note to remind the salesman to tell the customer to go contact them, or quite often this might be used by the owner of the company when he sends one of his helpers to the counter, maybe to pick up something that maybe this particular electrician is not allowed to maybe buy tools, or some other note like that. Very, very useful, used quite a lot. The customer pricing and printing section is used to assign the pricing class, that is the general pricing matrix that the customer will use for pricing out. Any contracts that might be assigned to the customer for special pricing of parts, quite often specifically just to a job, and to change the invoice and statement print styles. The default price class is used to assign a specific price matrix to the particular customer. Each company, each system is going to have a different naming convention that they use for pricing class, so see the person who set it up to decide which ones those are. Most people tend to have the pricing set up as suggested pricing, so their salesmen still have the ability to override the pricing and increase and decrease slightly as needed to tweak on a case-by-case basis. Contracts may be assigned. There could be a very large number of contracts that could be assigned, and this is a special override pricing for a smaller subset of items, typically no more than about 100, 150 at most. And when these settings are set, whatever's set in the bill to by default will carry down to the ship tos, the jobs as they're created, unless you specifically go into a job and you assign a different matrix and or different contracts, which is not uncommon. Do keep in mind that if you change something to the bill to, it after the job has been created and defaulted the first time, the changes done to the bill to will not automatically carry over after that. You have to manually go into each ship to and make the adjustments as well. It's only carried over from the bill to at the first time the job is created. The form printing options are going to control the behavior of the printouts from the system. How many copies of a particular form, whether invoice, statement, pick and ship tickets, are sent out of the system, whether they're printed, faxed, or emailed, or possibly processed by a third party like Billtrust, whether or not you want the price breakout, the extended pricing on the items to show up on the paperwork, or the totals to show up on the paperwork or not. This also has control parameters to group invoices together or processes together for different batch processing of the forms. There's also options for consolidated invoicing, which is a way of taking multiple generations of an invoice and squishing them into one print for processing at certain periods of time. Invoice select code is an additional way of grouping transactions together for a different way of doing batch processing than the standard. This is an option. It's not used very often, but sometimes is useful if you have some type of custom agreement for a particular customer to send their statements at a different time period. The invoice print copies are used to select how many copies of the invoices you want to send out. This can be the on-demand printing, or in the batch process, or possibly also in the bill trust processing if you're using bill trust third party. This parameter also works in conjunction with the invoice fax copy setting. Invoice fax copies is probably not used much anymore. You may see in there the settings 1, 2, or E. If you see E, this references to the electronic data interchange. If you've bought the Eclipse companion product for EDI and are doing a direct electronic transfer of the data straight into the customer's invoicing and billing system. Probably not too many people are doing that, although it's a nice feature. Single invoicing is left unchecked in every case I've ever seen. This parameter is used to set to print the invoice only on the completion of the order. So, interesting option, never used. Consolidated invoicing could be used to consolidate all generations of a shipment of an order into one print for a given time. This would normally be used by an irate customer that gets tired of maybe getting invoice updates every day, and perhaps they only want the consolidated invoicing to show up once a week. This bypasses the normal batch invoice printing process and has to be handled in a different way, so there's a substantial overhead in doing consolidated invoicing. Normally the parameter for consolidated invoicing is to select it broken down by ship to. Backorder printing. This controls whether or not the backordered items appear on the ship tickets. Typically this is left blank to whatever the system default has been set as. I believe the system default is for no backorder printing. The batch printing of statements is usually set to just one copy, and the remainder of the settings are usually blank or just use the defaults. The additional tab of the customer pricing and printing I've never used, although I see this feature here for disable FTP billing, which could be useful for exempting a customer from the bill trust processing. Print styles for the most part controls how the pricing is displayed on the forms. Net is the default, which goes and shows the extended pricing on the forms. The other common styles that you would normally see in a system would be blind for no pricing or totals, or blind totals for don't show the extended pricing on the items but show the total for the invoice or statement. The invoice and email print options are going to be different for each system depending on how your forms have been set up. Blank entries are going to be the system defaults, and that's how usually just leave it set as whatever the defaults. Anything done at the ship to level is going to override the settings carried down from the bill to. Normally these settings are not altered at the ship to level. Well, usually if there's any changes it's going to be at the bill to. Unless of course the job has already been created, then you have to go in each one manually, yada yada. The statement TIFF PDF options, usually you leave that blank at whatever the system default is. If you make a selection, it's going to override whatever the system default is. If you're emailing out, or you're trying to email out, make sure that you have the outbound email companion product for Eclipse, or else it won't work. As a general rule, PDF is a better format to send out than TIFF, just because it's a little cleaner looking and it is potentially easier to modify or scale as necessary on the customer end. And since I just talked about emailing forms out of the system, then I guess I kind of have to explain how to automatically email things out of the system. This is usually done by setting an activity trigger. Activity triggers have a variety of uses, but typically they're used to automate some system activity. Usually it's an email notification out of the system, although sometimes it's a queue notification or a few other things in there. These are commonly used to email invoices and statements out of the system directly to the customer instead of printing. This can be used in place of using a third-party system like BillTrust. Honestly, I'm not really sure why people spend the additional money for BillTrust if you've got the outbound email companion product. So you can set these triggers up, because then you can control it all completely within your system. Setting up the activity trigger for invoices and statements looks kind of convoluted and ugly, but actually it's pretty simple. So you'd go in and you'd select the type of trigger that you're wanting to do. In this case, we're email a statement invoice in lieu of printing. And then of course change the activity description. There's usually a couple of different styles, email styles, that you can select on this. Then in the foreground and background processing, you can change it to prompt you before it sends, or just automatically send, which is the standard. After the trigger is created, use the activity properties from the file menu to set the email template and the email address that you're going to be sending to, as you see here. And once the trigger has been set and saved, it will show up in the Customer Pricing and Printing tab in the trigger field. The sales tax override section is used to exempt the customer from having to collect sales tax on, and where you also will record their reseller number. There are several different types to pick from. If there isn't a type that seems to apply, you'll have to talk to your system administrator to add another reseller type. The customer notes don't display anywhere else but inside the customer record. You actually have to go in here to see them. There are up to 20 additional titles that can be created in control maintenance to have different notes applied. I've never seen this actually used, although it could be useful, and these notes should be reportable. You should be able to create reports that will pull the notes out, so it could be useful from that angle. The reminder notes are pretty neat because they are flexible in that they will pop up automatically in sales order entry, but only in the section that you specify. So unlike the other note that we talked about that popped up as soon as a sales order is started, this could be set to go somewhere else, which might allow you to target shipping instructions or some other type of thing. The other additional neat feature is they have an expiration date on them that you can set, so you don't have to go in and constantly maintain them. You can set them to expire and they'll just go away by themselves. In the additional customer information window, most of the parameters here are not often used. They're mostly overrides to change the default behavior of the system. The two fields that are occasionally used in additional customer information are the SIC code, which is a free-form entry that you can put in that allows you to filter on some reports. And the other one is the exclude from index, which is used in the process for closing a job and removing the job from the search list. As is usually the good rule in everything in Eclipse, you delete nothing because the database is so robust it doesn't really require a lot of maintenance or cleanup of old stuff. You tend to keep everything, and you just tend to hide it so you don't see it, just in case you need to go back and look at it later. So having said that, the normal process for closing a job in the system is to disable the order entry and remove the job from the search list, but don't erase from the system. So the way we go about doing that is we go into the customer maintenance and we set the auto delete flag in the customer type. This does not do what it says it does, but this is just part of the process. Then for me, at least in this system, I set the inside salesman as closed. This helps me for when I generate reports. In order to do this, I've had to create a user account called closed, so I can select that. This is a funny trick. Then you go into the credit controls and you set the no order entry flag to prevent anyone from doing any future orders against the system. It won't stop it if there's an existing order that's still in process though. And then the final thing is to go into the additional customer information and set the exclude from index so that when you do a search it will not pop up on the list. As I said, once you've done this, everything's still there, you can still report on it, it just doesn't show up, so it's not annoying the salesman when they have to search through and select the right job to do orders on. Aside from the customer maintenance templates and the default templates that are set up in the system, there are a couple other types of special customer records. Most notably, those would be contracts and rebates. The pricing matrices, which we will cover in other presentations, was set up in such a way that you could set up a pricing matrix per a particular customer. Later on, as Eclipse evolved, it became rather obvious that if you create a pricing matrix and put it right in an active customer's record, it really is difficult to maintain and keep track of. So this little process here was a way of using the pricing matrices and the setting up contracts and kind of detaching it from an active customer in such a way that it's much easier to keep track of and maintain. And this is why it's kind of kooky. So a contract is going to look like just a basic generic customer, but it's going to have no order entry set up on it and no line of credit, so you can't do anything against it. And the whole purpose of having this thing is just to be able to create a memorable name and to be able to build a pricing matrix attached to this name, and then use that name as a contract which you assign to any one of a variety of other customers. And this is just the way it's done. A rebate is essentially the same type of general setup as a contract, except with this additional information for processing the rebate claim. And obviously we use ACON, meaning a contract, AREB for obviously a rebate. You can come up with other names if you want, but that's what works in our system. Contracts and rebates can be kind of tricky and convoluted, and we will cover those in other presentations. And as I said earlier, the system will have in customer maintenance several different templates, some that are used directly by the system software, and some of it that you're going to create for other functions to help you create records as you go along. Here's an example of the default templates that are used when a new customer is created in the sales order entry. As you can see, we have 2 branch examples, so we would have 2 different records for the 2 branches. And this completes our presentation on general customer maintenance in Epicor Eclipse. Hopefully I didn't put you to sleep, and even better, that this information was useful. As always, I am not Scott Zahn. Thank you.